Before the first city rose, before gods had names, there was only the hum of rivers, two streams of silver, winding through emptiness, whispering a promise, remember me. From their breath came the first hands of clay, trembling beneath the sun. They built, they dreamed, they defied the silence, and the silence waited. Tonight, we walk through what remains of that dream, through dust that once sang, through stones that once prayed. Beneath every ruin lies a heartbeat still beating, and if you listen long enough, you will hear the world remembering itself. The story of Sumer is not history, it is memory, a song that forgot its own words, yet continues to echo through you, through every breath, through every dream of eternity. Pause. Distant thunder fades like a heartbeat. Close your eyes. The rivers are speaking again. Let them carry you back to the first dawn. The night is older than memory. I wake to the sound of water murmuring through reeds, a language older than speech itself. Two great rivers breathe in the dark, Tigris to the east, Euphrates to the west, and between them lies a strip of trembling light where creation still remembers its first dawn. They say the gods shaped the world from clay and mist, but I have come to believe the rivers wrote it first. Their currents whisper stories of birth and forgetting, carving letters no human eyes can read. I kneel beside them, pressing my palms into the cool mud until I feel the pulse beneath the earth, steady, eternal, like the heartbeat of a sleeping god. I am the Scribe of Sumer, the last keeper of the tablets. My task is simple, to remember before all is drowned. Each night I carve signs into wet clay, while the stars drift overhead like unblinking witnesses. Every symbol is a breath stolen from oblivion. Every line is a bridge across silence. Do you hear it too? That faint hum below the surface, the sound of the world being written again? Sometimes, when the wind curls low, I think the rivers speak to anyone who will listen. Perhaps they speak to you now. What would you ask them if they answered? Long before the first temple, before kings and wars, the land was empty and waiting. Then came the waters. They flooded, retreated, returned again, each time leaving behind a skin of fertile silt, a promise. Out of that promise rose the first huts woven from reeds, the first fires, the first hands that dared to mold the earth. I watched them still in my dreams, people bending over clay, shaping vessels that shine when the sun returns. Their laughter rises with the smoke of cooking fires. Their footprints trace spirals along the shore. They do not yet know what they build, yet something greater moves through them, the urge to remember, to keep what passes. When the flood recedes, I walk where the rivers meet. The air smells of salt and new beginnings. There, beneath a sky bright with uncounted stars, I make the first incision into clay. The stylus bites softly, the earth sighs. The mark is small, meaningless to any but me. Yet in that instant I feel the world tilt. Words are born. Tell me, listener, have you ever felt time pause beneath your fingertips? As if the moment you touch something, it begins to last forever? That is how writing began, not as invention, but as longing. The wind thickens with heat. Sand drifts against my ankles, whispering of deserts yet to come. But the rivers keep speaking, their voices weaving around each other like twin serpents guarding a secret. I lower my head and listen. Remember, they say. So I do. And as the first night of history settles over the plain, the water hums a lullaby that no one else will hear. I press my final mark into the clay, lift it toward the starlight, and watch it gleam like a newborn moon, fragile, silent, alive. Before the rivers found their voices, the gods were silent. They wandered through endless dust, shaping mountains with idle hands, carving valleys just to watch them fill with rain. But even they grew weary of stillness. So one night, beneath a moon as thin as a blade, Enki, the god of the deep waters, whispered, "Let there be someone to speak our names when we are gone." I was not yet born, nor was any human, but I have written the story as it was told in the currents. Enki reached into the mud at the river's bend, his fingers glowing with starlight. He molded a shape from the damp earth, a creature fragile yet upright, trembling in the night wind. Then he leaned close, his breath rippling the water, and exhaled life into clay. That first breath still moves through all of us. Can you feel it? If you close your eyes, breathe deeply, and listen past your own heartbeat, you might hear it too, the sound of eternity inhaling. The clay figure opened its eyes. Its pupils were the color of the river at dawn, shifting from gray to gold. It took its first step and sank slightly into the mud, leaving behind the first human footprint. The gods gathered to watch, astonished by what Enki had made. They saw frailty, yes, but also defiance, curiosity, and the wild hunger to understand. Enlil, Lord of the Wind, scowled. "You've made them too loud," he said. And truly, humans were noisy. They sang to the dawn, shouted across the plains, and spoke even when they had no one to answer them. But the gods, though annoyed, could not turn away. In every human cry, they heard a faint echo of their own loneliness. I have written this scene many times, but each time the clay softens beneath my stylus, as if it remembers its origin. Perhaps writing is just another act of shaping mud into meaning. Perhaps I, too, am a vessel for the breath of Enki. What about you, listener? When was the last time you shaped something with your hands? Something that made you feel alive? As centuries passed, the clay people learned to till the earth, to plant barley, to call rain by name. They built altars of stone, then towers that pierced the clouds. Every creation was a mirror, reflecting the gods back to themselves. Yet with each monument, humans stepped further from the rivers, further from the whisper that had made them. Sometimes, as I sit beside my tablets, I imagine that first man and woman walking across a silent world, the air around them still wet from creation. They do not know hunger or shame, only wonder. They trace spirals in the mud, perhaps by accident inventing symbols before they knew what words were. The wind rises again tonight. It carries the scent of clay after rain, the same scent, I think, that the gods once inhaled when they first dreamed of us. I close my eyes and see their faces carved from light, watching humanity's first dawn with quiet pride and growing fear. For what the gods had shaped could now shape itself. Do not let them forget us, Enki said. I will not. I whisper, thousands of years later, carving his name into the clay once more. The rivers sigh. The stars drift lower. My lamp burns weakly beside me, its flame shivering like a nervous heartbeat. Somewhere beyond the reeds, a jackal cries, its voice fading into the wide, eternal silence. And I wonder, as every scribe must, when we vanish, who will write the next beginning? Fire was the second gift. Water had given life, but fire taught us what it meant to live. The old stories say Enki hid its spark inside the reeds, so that only those brave enough to burn their hands could claim it. Others whisper that a woman found it first, her eyes bright as copper, her hair catching the reflection of the sun. She struck two stones together and called out, "Awake!" The sound of that word split the silence of the world. Flame leapt from stone to grass, and for the first time, night retreated. The rivers glowed red in wonder, the stars dimmed in jealousy, and humankind stood beneath the new light, terrified, then laughing. I remember the warmth, though I was born long after. I feel it each time I lean close to my clay tablets, my lamp trembling in the dark. The same flame that once lit the faces of the first builders now flickers across my hands. It is strange to think how one spark can outlive mountains. But fire is a restless god. It devours as easily as it blesses. And when the gods saw humans using it to cook food, to forge tools, to chase shadows, they grew uneasy. Enlil, Lord of the Storm, said, "They forget who gave them breath." Inanna, the radiant queen, replied, "They do not forget, they dream of becoming like us." And so began the quarrel between heaven and earth. Tell me, listener, have you ever wanted something so fiercely that even the stars seemed to lean closer? That was how humankind felt. They built kilns that roared like dragons, smelted copper until it flowed like sunset, and shaped weapons bright as lightning. The world shimmered with creation, but the gods looked down and saw rebellion, so they decided to test us. They sent droughts first, light punishments, to remind us of our place. Then came sickness, to quiet the laughter of cities. But still we built, we sang, we lit fires against the dark. And then Enlil, wrathful and weary, whispered the word no mortal should ever hear. Flood. The sky split open. Rain fell not as blessing, but as judgment. The rivers, my two eternal companions, swelled beyond their banks and turned against the land. I have written this tale upon dozens of tablets, yet the clay never dries fast enough to hold its sorrow. They say the waters rose for 7 days and 7 nights. Temples vanished beneath waves. The cries of animals echoed through the dark, and even the mountains wept salt into the sea. I imagine the gods watching, their faces mirrored in the lightning, solemn, regretful, but unyielding. In the midst of the storm, one man, Atrahasis, built a vessel from reeds and bitumen. He carried his family and the seeds of every creature that would listen. I dream of him often, rowing through endless black water, the world reduced to a single heartbeat beneath his oars. When dawn finally broke, it did not look like morning. It looked like memory. The waters withdrew, slow and ashamed, leaving behind silence and mud. And in that silence, Atrahasis offered thanks. He burned sweet wood on an altar, and the smoke rose toward the heavens. The gods leaned down to breathe it in. Even Enlil's fury cooled. No more floods, he said. Let death come slowly, in its own time. And so mortality was born, not as punishment, but as mercy. Do you see now, listener, how the world learned balance? Every gift the gods gave came with its echo. Water to nurture, fire to destroy, death to preserve life itself. We became the keepers of opposites, the fragile thread between chaos and creation. Tonight, as the rain brushes my roof of reeds, I listen to the echo of that ancient flood. The clay under my hand still tastes faintly of salt, as if remembering. I write by firelight, the flame bending low with the wind, and I wonder, if the gods drown the world again, would anyone remember to rebuild? Would anyone carve words into wet earth, so that some future voice, perhaps yours, could hear ours whispering back? The river sighs outside my hut. My lamp sputters once, twice, then steadies. The wind cools, the air thick with the smell of clay and smoke. I press the stylus down and finish the final line. Out of water came breath. Out of fire came thought. Out of memory, humankind. And when the night grows too still, I swear I can hear Enki himself breathing through the darkness, murmuring, "Write, little scribe. The flood will come again, but words will float." After the flood, the world was quiet, not silent, never silent, but hushed, as if creation itself was catching its breath. The air smelled of ash and salt. Broken trees floated where cities had been, their roots tangled with fragments of shrines. For the first time since the beginning, even the gods were weary. Enki looked upon the soaked plain and said, "Let the waters retreat, but let their memory remain." So the rivers carved their new beds, curling through the ruins like veins through old flesh. The land began to breathe again. Grasses returned, timid and green, and the first birds came fluttering back, their wings wet with dawn. I have seen that dawn in my dreams. It rises slowly, like a scar healing. The survivors crawl from their boats, blinking against the sun. Their faces are marked by salt and wonder. They build fires and stare into the smoke, as if expecting to see the faces of gods forming there. Do you ever wonder what it feels like to start the world over? To step onto soil that remembers every mistake, and still be brave enough to plant seeds? That was how the covenant began. The gods, moved by pity or perhaps by guilt, made a new promise to humankind. They would never again destroy the earth by flood, but they would leave reminders, signs in the sky, to teach mortals the rhythm of time. Enki lifted his hands toward the heavens, and from his fingers spilled dust of silver and flame. The dust became stars, scattered like seeds across the black fields of night. He placed the moon upon the path of the sky to count months, and told the sun to measure days. Then he spoke, "Watch the heavens, and you will know the will of the gods. Forget them, and darkness will forget you." I imagine the people listening, trembling beside their fires. The night was vast and unending, yet for the first time it had meaning. Every star became a word, every constellation a sentence in the divine language. I learned to read those words before I ever learned to write. My teacher was the river itself, reflecting the heavens in its shifting skin. Each ripple was a heartbeat of the cosmos. When I was a child, I thought the stars were eyes, watching to see if we would remember our vows. Even now, when I press my stylus into clay, I feel them watching. Do you look at the stars where you are, listener? Do you still feel they are watching you too? Generations passed, and the covenant shaped everything we built. The farmers sowed their barley when the Pleiades rose. The priests set their festivals by the turning of the moon. Even kings bowed to the sky before they dared to speak of conquest, for the heavens had become law. But the stars do not only bless, they warn. When they tremble, storms come. When they vanish, famine follows. I once saw the red star of Nergal flare above the horizon, and knew war was coming before any soldier took up a spear. That night I sat by the rivers, carving these omens into clay so no one would forget. The reeds whispered in the dark, swaying with unseen hands. I remember thinking, perhaps this is what the gods intended, that we learn to read their silence, to find meaning even in their absence. For the truth is, the gods have grown quiet again. They do not speak as they once did, in thunder or flame. Their voices now hide in smaller things. The hiss of wind through grass, the pulse of water under mud, the flicker of stars. And maybe that is enough. Sometimes, when I lift my eyes from the tablets and gaze at the sky, I imagine Enki still tracing circles through the constellations, adjusting their light like a patient craftsman. I imagine him whispering through the night, "Remember the covenant, remember the breath." And I whisper back, "I will." The night deepens. My lamp burns low. I can see the reflection of the stars in the clay, tiny points of silver dancing in the wet earth. I touch one gently with my fingertip and think, perhaps this is how the gods touch us still. So I keep writing, because every mark, every breath, every word carved into earth is another kind of star, one that will not fade when dawn returns. Tell me, listener, if you could carve a promise into the world, what would it be? Would you ask for peace, for remembrance, for another dawn? Or would you simply whisper into the dark, "I am still here"? And maybe that alone is the true covenant, the quiet persistence of those who survive the flood, who keep the fire, who still dare to write beneath the eternal watch of the stars. The rivers had spoken, the stars had given their promise. And now, out of mud and memory, the first city began to rise. It was not built of stone, nor born of conquest, but of patience. The people gathered reeds from the marshes, thin, golden, whispering like the breath of forgotten gods. They bound them into walls, curved them into roofs, and the wind sang through them like flutes. The sound never stopped. Day and night, the city hummed softly, as if alive. They called it Eridu, the place where heaven first touched earth. And it was here, the elders say, that Enki himself came walking among mortals, his feet leaving ripples instead of footprints. I remember the way my teacher described that moment. He said the air shimmered as if time itself had bent to watch. The marsh turned silver. The people bowed, not from fear, but recognition. They built an altar of wet clay at the edge of the water, and Enki blessed it with a single drop from his hand. "Guard this," he told them, "for all wisdom begins in water." Do you ever think about where wisdom begins for you, listener? Is it in words or silence, in books, or in the moments when you simply listen to the world breathing? In Eridu, everything was new. The people learned to count their harvest, to mark the flood's return, to trade reeds for grain and clay for fish. Children played along the canals. chasing their reflections as if they were spirits. At night, fires burned low and steady, and the stars watched their own reflection in the water. I sometimes think that city was the Earth's first heartbeat. Soft, fragile, yet infinite. Each dawn, smoke rose from 100 hearths. The air smelled of barley and wet soil, and at the center of it all stood a shrine, a simple platform of mud brick, barely high enough to reach a man's shoulder. Yet that was where the priests gathered, calling to Enki through the morning mist. They sang not for miracles, but for memory. The people offered him bread, beer, and song. In return, they learned the rhythm of the rivers, the secret of canals, the art of guiding water rather than fearing it. For the first time, humans shaped the earth to their will. They drew lines where the flood once ruled. They built dikes to tame the chaos. And so control was born, and with it destiny. I still remember the stories carved on early tablets, the first marks of administration. How many jars of grain? How many workers? How many days since the last rain? It seems small, doesn't it? But that was how civilization began. Not with kings or wars, but with counting. To count is to remember, and to remember is to defy oblivion. When I touch those ancient tablets, I can still feel the grooves of their fingers. They were not so different from us, worried, hopeful, trying to hold on to what time takes away. Tell me, listener, what do you wish you could count and keep forever? The days that made you happiest? The faces that slipped from memory? By night, the priests of Eridu said they could hear Enki whisper through the rushes. He told them stories about the deep, a place beneath the rivers where dreams were born before men awoke. Some claimed to have seen his temple beneath the water, walls made of light and floors that shimmered like fish scales. But when they dove to find it, there was only reflection, an illusion that faded as soon as they touched it. Still, they believed. Faith, like water, flowed where it was guided. So Eridu grew. The reed huts gave way to brick walls, the clay altar to a stepped platform, and from the platform rose the first temple tower, a child's echo of the mountains where the gods once dwelled. From there, smoke drifted upward each morning like prayers written in air. I imagine standing there, stylus in hand, as the sun rose over the marsh, the sound of cranes calling, the reeds rustling, and somewhere in the distance, the faint rhythm of hammers shaping mud into eternity. People often ask what the first city looked like. I tell them it did not look, it sounded. The whisper of reeds, the murmur of water, the slow exhale of wind through hollow walls. It was less a place, more a song. Perhaps all cities, since then, have been trying to sing that same melody again. Tonight, I write these words beside my own small lamp. The river outside is low, but steady. I can hear the frogs chanting in rhythm, the same way they must have thousands of years ago in Eridu. I think of Enki's words, "Guard this, for all wisdom begins in water." And I wonder, did he mean the rivers or ourselves? Because we, too, are made of water and memory. I press my stylus into the clay, careful and slow. Each mark ripples, with meaning older than language. I know one day this tablet will dry, and the world will forget again. But for now, as I write, the reeds outside sway like worshippers in prayer, and I can almost hear the city of Eridu breathing once more. The first city had learned to breathe. Now it sought to control its breath. The people of Eridu, once content to live with the rhythm of the rivers, began to dream of order. The floods had made the soil rich, but their chaos terrified even the bravest farmers. One year the waters blessed them. The next, they devoured everything. And so, guided by memory and necessity, humanity reached for mastery. They learned to cut channels through the plain, to carve veins into the body of the earth. At first, it was simple. A trench, a wooden gate, a shared labor among neighbors. But soon, it became something larger, a web of canals stretching from horizon to horizon, shimmering like threads of silver beneath the sun. To control water is to command life itself. And so, the first law was written, not on clay, but in mud and sweat. I remember the old stories. The priest said Enki whispered the design into a dream. Shape the rivers as I shaped you. But remember, what gives life can also unmake it. Yet men rarely remember warnings, only victories. The builders dug deeper. They raised embankments and dams, directing the floods into fields that no rain had ever reached. Barley rose tall, golden, and proud. The people rejoiced. They sang to the canals as though they were living gods. They even gave them names: the artery of plenty, the channel of life. But beneath their feet, the rivers murmured uneasily. Tell me, listener, have you ever loved something so much that you tried to control it, only to find it slipping further away? That was how the people of Eridu felt with the water. Each time they bent it to their will, they grew prouder. Each time it obeyed, they forgot that it once spoke with a divine voice. Soon disputes began. Whose field should the canal bless first? Who should maintain the gates? And who owned the water when it left the river and became man's servant? Arguments turned to quarrels, and quarrels to judgment. The priests gathered in the temple, their hands slick with clay, and declared the first decree. The water shall flow where the gods have marked, and none shall steal its path. But men are cleverer than decrees. They built secret ditches in the night, siphoning the river's blessing toward their own land. When the flood came late or weak, neighbors blamed each other. You hoarded it, they said. You offended Enki. I have read the tablets that record these disputes. They are older than any king, older than any war. Lines of wedges pressed into clay, grain lost, boundary broken, oath betrayed. It is strange how familiar they sound, like echoes of our own arguments, whispered across 4,000 years. The law of water became the heart of civilization. To manage the canals, people needed leaders. To record rations, they needed scribes. To enforce fairness, they needed judgment. And thus, from the river's current flowed the idea of government itself. I often think Enki must have smiled when he saw it happen, his creation learning to govern itself, yet unknowingly repeating his own divine patterns. For even the gods must balance power and mercy. Do you see it, listener? How every step forward carries the shadow of the flood behind it. How even the calmest stream hides the memory of chaos. One summer, when the heat would not break and the canals cracked with thirst, the priests gathered again. They knelt beside the river and offered gold, silver, and oil, but the water did not rise. So they turned to the people, demanding more labor, more offerings, more devotion. Enki is displeased, they said. The dikes must be rebuilt. And they were, by hands that trembled with exhaustion, by bodies that baked beneath the relentless sun. The water returned slowly, grudgingly, and the harvest that year was plentiful. But something had changed. The people no longer sang while they worked. They no longer called the canals by names of praise. They spoke of them with caution, almost fear. The law had done what all laws eventually do. It preserved life, but it also bound it. Now, when I write beside my lamp, I sometimes hear the faint trickle of water through the old irrigation channels near my dwelling. The sound is ancient, older than any word. It reminds me that the same hands that saved the world from famine also taught it the meaning of control. We built dikes to keep the flood away, and in doing so, built walls around our souls. Tell me, listener, do you think we were right to tame the rivers? Would you have done the same? Had you seen your home drown beneath a restless sky? The night air cools. My lamp burns low. I dip my fingers in a bowl of water and trace a single ripple. For a moment, I think I hear the old voice again, the God of wisdom whispering through the dark. Remember, little scribe, he says, the first law was not written to control the water, but to keep it flowing. And so I write his words into the clay, hoping the earth itself will remember when we no longer do. There came a time when the rivers no longer spoke directly, when the floods obeyed men's walls, but the gods fell silent. And in that silence, humanity began to build again, this time not for shelter, but for meaning. At the heart of Eridu, where the water still gleamed like molten silver, the people gathered to raise a house for their unseen father. They said Enki lived in the deep, beneath the surface of the world, where light could not reach. Yet they dreamed of giving him a place above the earth, where his wisdom could rise like the tide at dawn. So they began the great work. Men waded through the marsh with baskets of mud on their backs. Women molded bricks in the sun, their laughter echoing like bells. Every layer rose slowly, as if the earth itself were remembering how to climb. The air shimmered with heat and devotion. Each morning, the builders faced the east and poured water from the river onto the foundation. For Enki, they said, for wisdom that flows. And as they worked, they sang, from the deep he comes, he who gives words to the silent, breath to the clay, and light to the water. Tell me, listener, have you ever built something with your own hands and felt it hum beneath your skin as if it were alive? That was how the temple felt, alive, breathing, drinking sunlight. When the walls reached the height of a man, the priests came, dressed in woven reeds and dyed wool. They carried copper bowls filled with sweet water and crushed dates, offerings meant to please the god. The eldest among them, a woman whose hair was white as salt, touched the mud brick with her palm and whispered, "Here the river meets the sky." From that moment, the temple of Enki was more than stone and clay. It became the meeting point between heaven and earth, between thought and matter. I still remember the scent, bitumen and incense, mingled with rain that fell through the open roof. At the center stood a pool of still water, a mirror meant to call Enki's attention. When the priests spoke over it, their voices echoed in ripples. Sometimes, if you looked long enough, you could see your reflection tremble into another face, one older, calmer, divine. The temple changed the city. People began to walk softer near its walls. They spoke in lower tones, as if the air itself demanded reverence. The farmers brought their first barley harvest to its gates. Fishermen laid their finest catches at its steps. Even the potters pressed small marks of offering into their jars before firing them. Tiny spirals, waves, or the shape of a fish. The gods were returning, not through thunder or flood, but through craft. And yet, devotion always carries a shadow. The priests, who had once been keepers of stories, now became keepers of rules. They measured offerings, divided portions, and wrote new decrees on fresh tablets. They claimed the temple's water was sacred, and that only those who paid tribute could draw near. Soon, what had been a place of communion became a place of hierarchy. I have read their records, lists of names, rations, and punishments. They carved them with the same care as prayers. In time, no one could tell the difference between worship and administration. Tell me, listener, do you think faith can survive when it becomes organized? When it wears the mask of power instead of wonder? One evening, after the workers had gone and the torches burned low, I crept into the temple alone. The air was thick with the smell of rain and oil. I knelt beside the sacred pool and whispered, "Are you still here, Lord of the Deep?" At first, there was only silence. Then, faintly, the water stirred. A single bubble rose, broke, and the air filled with a whisper so soft I thought it was the wind. "Right," it said. That was all. So I did. I took up my stylus and carved into wet clay. Enki does not dwell in stone, but in the words we make from silence. And perhaps that is the truest faith of all, to create, not to command, to remember, not to own. When dawn came, the temple shone like new copper. The priest said it was the god's blessing, but I knew it was something simpler, the light of human devotion, reflecting back upon itself. That morning, as I left, I turned once more toward the temple's high door and whispered my own prayer, quiet enough that only the wind could hear it. May this place remain alive as long as we dare to remember. And the river answered with a sound like laughter. After Eridu came Uruk, and with it, the first dream of eternity. The people said the gods no longer walked openly among them, yet something greater stirred within human hearts. The rivers had taught them flow. The temples had taught them reverence. Now they wished to leave behind something that even time could not erode. They gathered where the earth rose slightly above the floodplain, And there, beneath the burning sky, they began to build a city unlike any other. The walls came first, white bricks baked in the sun, stacked layer upon layer, until they gleamed like bone under daylight and silver under the moon. From afar, Uruk shimmered as if carved from cloud. Those who approached it saw their reflections ripple along its bright surface, and felt small, yet chosen. I remember the stories of its founding, the drums echoing through the plain, the smell of bitumen and sweat, the priests blessing every gate with water drawn from Merida's ancient wells. The people worked in silence at dawn, but by evening, their songs rolled across the horizon like thunder. They believed the walls would protect not just their bodies, but their memories. Do you think a wall can keep time itself away, listener? If you built something that could never fall, would you still need to dream? Within the gleaming barrier rose streets wide enough for chariots, canals running straight as the gods' fingers, and towers that reached toward the heavens. Markets filled with copper, lapis, and incense. Gardens floated above rooftops, dripping green life over the pale brick. And at its center stood a temple greater than any before it, the house of Inanna, goddess of love and war. Its columns shimmered with crushed shell and painted limestone. Its stairways spiraled like the paths of stars. The scent of myrrh and cedar hung in the air so thick it could make a man weep. They said Inanna herself descended there each dusk, her feet leaving trails of light across the polished floors. When the evening winds blew through the open courtyards, it sounded like her laughter, soft, distant, untouchable. Uruk became a beacon. Traders from distant lands came bearing obsidian, gold, and stories. Every language found a voice within its walls. And for the first time, men began to speak of legacy, of what might remain after death. The scribes multiplied, tablets piled high. We wrote of crops, of offerings, of kings, and of dreams. We invented records so that forgetting would die before we did. I was a young apprentice then, still learning to steady my hand. My teacher would say, "Every mark you make will outlive you, so let it breathe gently." I did not yet understand, but one night, while copying an inventory of barley, I paused. The moonlight spilled across the clay, turning the symbols pale gold. In that moment, I felt it, that trembling line between word and eternity. To write was to build another kind of wall, not of stone, but of memory. Tell me, listener, what would you carve into clay if you knew it might be read 5,000 years from now? A prayer? A confession? A promise? The people of Uruk carved all of these. They filled the city with stories, the names of kings, the cycles of the moon, songs of lovers who met by the canal at dusk. Even their sorrow had architecture, but in their devotion to permanence, something subtle shifted. They began to believe that beauty itself could be owned, that if they made it high enough, wide enough, glorious enough, it would never fade. That is when they began to speak of a man named Gilgamesh, half god, half human, the builder of Uruk's final walls. He walked among his people like a storm wrapped in flesh. They say his eyes saw farther than any mortals, that he feared nothing except the quiet that follows greatness. He wanted a city to touch heaven. He wanted to defeat time itself. And perhaps, for a moment, he did. But that is another story, one I will tell you soon. Tonight, I sit by the river and look toward where Uruk once stood. The water runs black in the starlight, reflecting only faint traces of what was. The walls are gone now, crumbled, scattered, reclaimed by the same soil that once gave them birth. Yet when the wind rises, I swear I can still hear their echo, the hum of brick, the breath of thousands building toward eternity. Maybe that is what immortality truly is, not the walls, but the echo they leave behind. I press my stylus into the clay, slow and steady, and carve the final line. The gods built mountains. Men built cities. Both crumble, but the echo remains. The river sighs. My lamp flickers. And somewhere, far beyond the dark, the white walls of Uruk shimmer again. Not of stone this time, but of memory. When the walls of Uruk gleamed brightest, A single man stood upon them and looked beyond. He was called Gilgamesh, son of a mortal woman, and a god who had vanished with the wind. His eyes held the calm of eternity and the hunger of men who fear to die. The people called him the king who spoke to the sky, for he dared to lift his gaze higher than any before him. They say he did not sleep. At night, while the city dreamed, he walked the ramparts, listening to the silence between the stars. He would whisper, "Is this all? These bricks, this glory, this noise of men who think they are eternal?" Tell me, listener, have you ever looked up at the night sky and felt both infinite and small at once? That was how the king felt every hour of his reign. He ruled with wisdom, but also restlessness. The canals ran smooth, the markets overflowed with grain, and the temples sang his name. Yet peace made him uneasy. He longed for something beyond the reach of time. And so, one night, under a crescent moon, he called upon the god of storms. He raised a cup of copper wine and cried, "Enlil, if men are born only to die, then why do we dream?" The thunder answered with silence, but sometimes silence is the truest reply. In the days that followed, strange dreams came to him. He saw a great cedar forest at the edge of the world, guarded by a creature of light and shadow. He saw a door carved from stars, and beyond it, a flood that erased all names. He awoke each morning trembling, whispering, "There must be more." The priests told him to offer sacrifice, to be content with the blessings of the gods. But Gilgamesh laughed. "Contentment," he said, "is the beginning of death." And so began the first rebellion, not of swords or blood, but of thought. He built towers higher than temples, claiming he would touch the dwelling of the heavens. He commanded his scribes to write not only prayers but stories, songs of heroes, laments of failure, and questions that even gods could not answer. "If we cannot live forever," he said, "then our words must." The people feared his ambition. Some worshipped him. Others whispered that he had angered the sky. Yet when he passed, no one dared to speak, for his shadow stretched longer than the city walls. One night, an old scribe recorded a vision. He wrote that the king stood upon the highest tower, his robe whipping like flame, his eyes burning with a strange fire. The wind spoke his name, and he answered not in prayer, but in challenge. "Show me the secret," he said to the stars. "Show me what the gods hide from us." The heavens did not strike him down. Instead, a single meteor blazed across the sky, falling beyond the horizon where the great cedar forest lay. Gilgamesh took it as a sign. At dawn, he summoned his council. "I will cross the world," he declared, "and carve my name upon the edge of it." And though his priests begged him to remain, he smiled. What is a king who never leaves his throne? Dust waiting to happen. Before his journey, he walked once more through the streets of Uruk. The markets quieted as he passed. The children stared in awe. An old woman offered him bread and said, "You are already immortal, my king. Why seek more?" He took the bread gently, broke it in half, and whispered, "Because even immortality is nothing without understanding." That was the last day Uruk saw him as a man. I have seen the tablets that tell of his journey, his battle with the guardian of the forest, his friendship with the wild man Enkidu, his descent into the mountains and the sea. But those belong to other nights, other tellings. Tonight, I only remember the sound of his footsteps on the white walls, the quiet defiance of a mortal who dared to speak to the sky and expected an answer. Tell me, listener, if you could ask the heavens one question and be sure it would answer, what would you ask? As for Gilgamesh, his question still echoes, somewhere between the stars and the dust. And when the night grows still, if you listen closely, you may hear it too, the whisper of the first king who refused to bow. Why were we given hearts that dream of eternity if we were never meant to reach it? No one has answered him yet. Before the city sang, before the scribes carved their first signs, there walked a creature made of wind and dust. They called him Enkidu, born not of womb, but of wilderness. The gods had shaped him from the clay of forgotten riverbeds, breathing into him the sigh of the plains and the howl of the lion. His hair was tangled like reeds after rain, his skin the color of new earth. He ran with gazelles, drank from mountain springs, and knew no name, no law, no sorrow. To the animals, he was brother. To the sky, he was silence moving. When he slept, the stars leaned closer, as if curious to see what sort of being dared to dream without language. One night, a shepherd saw him crouched beside a watering hole. The wild man's reflection trembled upon the surface, and he growled softly at his own image, unsure whether it was friend or rival. The shepherd fled to Uruk, trembling, and told the priests, "There's one outside our walls who lives like a god but knows nothing of men." Gilgamesh, the restless king, smiled when he heard this. "Then perhaps the heavens have sent me a mirror. Tell me, listener, have you ever met someone who reflected everything you are, yet stood on the opposite shore of your being?" That was how the king felt. He ordered a woman to go to the plains, not a warrior, but a priestess, Shamhat, whose voice could tame storms. "Teach him," Gilgamesh said, "what it means to be human." And so she went, carrying bread, wine, and patience. For 7 days, she waited near the watering place, singing softly to the wind. Enkidu watched from the grass, uncertain. The animals circled warily, sensing change in the air. When she finally smiled at him, he did not run. Something in her eyes, warm as sunlight on river water, held him still. She spoke no command, only a greeting. "Come and eat." He hesitated, then crept closer. His hand shook as he tasted the bread. It was coarse and strange, but heavy with warmth. Then she gave him wine, sweet, burning, alive. He laughed for the first time, a sound that startled even himself. The animals fled. The wilderness, once his mother, turned its face away. That night, Enkidu slept beside the priestess beneath the stars. And when he awoke, the world had changed. He looked at the gazelles grazing nearby, and they no longer came to him. He reached for the river, but its song had grown distant. He placed his hand over his heart and felt it beating like a drum, slow, heavy aware. He was no longer the wind. He was a man. Sham had led him toward Uruk, her words unfolding like a new language. There are walls here, strong as mountains. There are kings who speak with the gods. You will see what men have built from dust. Each step took him further from the silence of his birth. He stumbled often and used to the weight of choice. When they reached the gates of Uruk, the guard stared, half in fear, half in awe. Enkidu's eyes gleamed like the horizon at dawn, untamed, yet searching for meaning. And there, upon the white walls, Gilgamesh awaited him. 2 men, one shaped by civilization, the other by chaos, stared at each other without words. The wind hushed. The city seemed to hold its breath. Then, like rivers meeting, they collided, fists and roars, and dust rising around them. The struggle lasted until the sun turned red and fell into the west. Neither yielded. When at last they collapsed, exhausted, Gilgamesh laughed through blood and dust. "You are the storm I was waiting for," he said. Enkidu smiled faintly. "And you are the cage I was meant to break." In that moment, they became brothers. The people of Uruk watched in wonder. 2 opposites, king and wild man, bound not by conquest, but by recognition. Together they stood at the gates, shoulder to shoulder, gazing toward the horizon that neither could conquer alone. Tell me, listener, have you ever found a friendship that felt fated, as if the universe itself paused to make room for it? That night, the king and the wild man shared wine in silence. Above them, the stars burned like ancient eyes, patient and knowing. And somewhere in the distance, the lions of the plains howled for the one who had left them behind. Enkidu looked toward the dark fields and whispered, "I will not forget you." But even as he spoke, the memory of running with the wind began to fade. Perhaps that is the first cost of being human, not the loss of freedom, but the ache of remembering what it felt like to be unbound. The plains had grown quiet. The city slept beneath its moonlit walls. But the hearts of 2 men, one born of dust, one born of kings, burned brighter than the torches of Uruk. Gilgamesh and Enkidu sat upon the temple steps, wine between them, silence all around. The stars trembled faintly above, as if aware of the words about to be spoken. "There's a place beyond the 7 mountains," said Gilgamesh, his voice low and even, "where the cedars touch heaven. They say the air there smells of creation itself." Enkidu turned his eyes toward the dark horizon. "That is the forest of the gods," he murmured. "I know its wind. I have heard it in my sleep. The guardian there," continued Gilgamesh, "is called Humbaba, a creature of light and shadow, born from the breath of Enlil. If I defeat him, I will carve my name upon the trunks of those trees, and the gods themselves will remember me. Tell me, listener, have you ever longed for something so vast, so impossible, that even fear began to taste like courage?" Enkidu hesitated. He knew the forest, had roamed its edges when he was still wild and nameless. "Humbaba is not meant for men," he warned. "His roar is thunder, his breath is fire." But the king only smiled. "Then we will bring silence to thunder and light to fire." So they prepared for the journey. They prayed to Shamash, the sun god, for protection. They polished their bronze weapons until they gleamed like dawn. And as the gates of Uruk opened, the people gathered to watch, eyes wide, hearts trembling. The king of civilization and the son of the wilderness walked out side by side, toward the unknown. For 7 days and 7 nights, they traveled through lands of dust and heat. They crossed rivers that murmured secrets, mountains that bled with ire, valleys where no bird dared sing. Sometimes, at dusk, Enkidu would pause, listening to the wind. "The forest is near," he would whisper. "Can you hear it breathing?" Gilgamesh would nod, though all he heard was his own heartbeat. On the 8th morning, mist covered the earth like smoke, and there, rising before them, stood the forest of the gods. The trees were impossibly tall, the trunks glowing faintly with golden resin. The air shimmered as though filled with unseen wings. Every leaf whispered in a language older than fire. The ground was soft and strange beneath their feet, neither soil nor stone, but something in between, alive and listening. Gilgamesh felt awe for the first time, not the awe of kings or temples, but the quiet kind, the kind that humbles. "This," he said softly, "is what the gods see when they dream." They entered. Light fell through the branches in great columns, turning dust into drifting stars. Somewhere far ahead, a low sound rolled through the trees, half growl, half thunder. Enkidu froze. "That is him," he whispered. "Humbaba." The creature appeared as mist at first, then shape, then form. A giant whose skin shimmered like bronze, whose eyes burned like twin suns. His voice broke the forest in two. "Why have you come, little kings of clay?" Gilgamesh gripped his axe. "To carve my name among the cedars, to prove that man can stand where gods forbid." Humbaba laughed, a sound like falling mountains, then stand and fall. The battle that followed was unlike any on earth. The trees themselves seemed to tremble. The air burned with light and shadow. Gilgamesh swung his blade. Enkidu roared beside him, and the ground shuddered beneath their fury. For 7 strikes the giant resisted, his laughter shaking the leaves from the canopy. But on the 8th, the sun broke through the clouds, and its light struck Gilgamesh's blade. Shamash's blessing shone down like a fire from the heavens. Humbaba fell. His blood steamed where it touched the roots. The forest groaned in mourning. When silence came, it was heavier than thunder. Enkidu looked upon the fallen guardian and whispered, "We have slain what should not die." Gilgamesh, panting, said, "Then let this place remember us." They cut down the tallest cedar and built a raft from its trunk. The scent of the wood followed them as they sailed homeward, sweet and sorrowful, like a prayer. Tell me, listener, when you achieve what you most desire, do you feel triumph, or an emptiness too vast to name? That night, as they slept beside the river, Enkidu dreamed. He saw the forest burning, The gods gathered in silence, at his own shadow sinking into the dark. When he awoke, he said nothing, and Gilgamesh, though he smiled, felt the weight of something unseen pressing against his heart. Far away, the forest whispered its final words into the wind. Greatness always asks for payment. The cedar raft drifted homeward, slow as thought. The scent of the forest still clung to their skin, sweet, thick, and ancient, as if the air itself remembered what they had done. Uruk was far away, hidden behind the curve of the river, but the gods were not. They watched. For 7 nights, Gilgamesh and Enkidu lay upon the deck beneath a sky streaked with fire. The stars hung low, whispering to each other. Sometimes the wind spoke in the voice of Humbaba. "You have cut the breath of the mountain," it said. "Now the mountain will remember." Gilgamesh laughed to silence the echo, but Enkidu did not laugh. He could still feel the forest's pulse fading beneath his hands. He could still see the golden eyes of the fallen guardian, dimming like 2 dying suns. When they returned to Uruk, the people celebrated with drums and flowers. The white walls blazed in the sun. Gilgamesh stood tall, triumphant, his name already carved upon the tablets of glory. But Enkidu stayed behind the procession, his gaze fixed on the horizon. At night, he began to dream. The first dream came gently, like mist. He saw himself walking through the forest again, but this time the trees were made of bone. The rivers flowed backward, carrying whispers instead of water. A black-winged bird watched him from a dead branch. "Who are you?" he asked. The bird answered, "The one who remembers what you have forgotten." He awoke in terror, sweat cold on his skin. Gilgamesh laughed it off. "Dreams are only echoes," he said. "We have angered nothing." But the next night, Enkidu dreamed again. He stood before the gates of Uruk. The white walls were crumbling, dissolving into dust. From the rubble rose the face of a god, vast, expressionless, carved of storm. "Who dares kill the chosen of Enlil?" The voice thundered. Enkidu fell to his knees. "It was I," he whispered. The wind struck him like a blade, and the god's shadow swallowed the sun. When he awoke, his limbs trembled. "The gods are angry," he said. Gilgamesh turned away, unwilling to listen. "We are kings of men," he muttered, "not slaves of the wind." But the third dream came, and this one spoke no riddles. In darkness, Enkidu saw a vast plain stretching forever, covered with dust that glowed faintly blue. He walked upon it barefoot, feeling nothing beneath his feet. Ahead, a door of stone rose from the ground, engraved with the names of those who had ever lived. From behind the door came voices, soft, endless, weeping. He tried to turn back, but hands of shadow reached from the earth, gentle yet unyielding. They took his wrists, his ankles, his breath. Then a figure emerged, a tall being cloaked in feathers, eyes like deep wells. "Enkidu," it said, "you have forgotten your place between the wild and the divine. You crossed the line meant only for gods." "Will I die?" Enkidu whispered. The being tilted its head. "You will return to what you were, clay and wind. But before you go, you will teach your friend what even kings must learn." He woke screaming. The fever began that same day. His strength, once that of lions, began to falter. His breath burned. His eyes grew dim. The people whispered, and Gilgamesh sat by his side, refusing to believe. For 12 days, the wild man wrestled with the invisible. He raved of the forest, of mountains that bled light, of gods who stood upon clouds and judged the hearts of men. "Brother," he gasped, "do you hear them calling?" Gilgamesh clutched his hand. "No one calls you. You are not done living. Tell me, listener, have you ever held someone's hand and felt time itself slipping through it?" On the 13th night, Enkidu's fever broke. His eyes cleared for a moment, and he smiled faintly. "The gods gave us strength," he whispered, "but not wisdom. We had to steal that for ourselves." Then, quieter still, "Do not let my death be only sorrow. Let it be your answer." And then silence. Gilgamesh sat there until dawn, watching the shadow of his friend fade with the night. When the first light touched the river, he whispered, "If this is what it means to be human, then I will find the gods themselves and ask why." The morning wind carried no reply, only the soft rustle of leaves, like wings returning to the forest. Enkidu was gone, and in the stillness he left behind, the first grief in history was born. After Enkidu's death, the city of Uruk fell silent. No music rose from its courtyards. No laughter echoed in its markets. The king who once spoke to the sky now walked among the dead. Gilgamesh wandered the streets alone, his royal robes torn, dust upon his hair. He no longer saw the shining walls or the glory he had built. Everywhere he looked, he saw only the shadow of his friend, his hand upon the gates, his smile fading into smoke. For 7 days, he did not eat. For 7 nights, he did not sleep. He sat beside Enkidu's body, waiting for the gods to change their minds. But when the first worm crawled from his friend's ear, he screamed and fled the city. He ran until the rivers disappeared behind him, until the sand burned his feet and the stars spun above like cold eyes. "Where are you going?" the wind asked. "To find life," he whispered. "To ask the gods why they gave me a heart that breaks." Tell me, listener, have you ever lost someone so completely that the world itself seemed emptied of meaning? That even the sun felt like a wound reopening each dawn? That was how the king walked, haunted barefoot, driven by a question no god had answered. He crossed barren plains where no grass grew. He wandered through mountains that moaned like sleeping beasts. He passed through lands where the dead were said to whisper beneath the sand, calling out for memory. One night, he reached the edge of the world. There, the mountains of Mashu rose like black teeth against the stars. 2 scorpion men guarded the gate, their faces stern and their bodies half fire, half stone. "Who are you?" one asked. "To walk the road that no mortal may take." "I am Gilgamesh," he answered, voice raw. 2/3 divine, 1/3 dust. "I seek Utnapishtim, the immortal who survived the flood. I will ask him the secret of life that does not end." The scorpion men looked at each other, their stingers flicking in thought. "No mortal who enters this gate returns unchanged." One said, "I am already changed." Gilgamesh replied, "Let me pass." So they opened a path through the mountains. Darkness swallowed him whole. The air turned thick and cold. For 12 leagues he walked in utter night, where neither moon nor star dared enter. He could not see his hands, nor hear his breath. He thought of Enkidu, of laughter by the river, of the battle in the forest, of the day his friend's voice fell silent. Each memory became a step forward, a light flickering just enough to guide him through the void. At last, after what felt like eternity, a faint glow appeared ahead, a horizon of gold and blue. He stepped through and found himself upon the shore of the cosmic sea, where the waters of life touched the edge of the sky. The air smelled of salt and immortality. A woman sat by the shore, weaving nets of light. She looked up as he approached. "Why have you come, child of the city?" she asked. "To escape death," he said, "to find the one who lives forever." She shook her head, pity in her eyes. "You seek what even gods envy. The path beyond this sea is guarded by the ferryman, Urshanabi. But beware, each question you ask will cost you something you cannot reclaim." He bowed. "I have already lost everything." Urshanabi appeared then, cloaked in reeds and shadow. His boat was made of silence, his oars of time itself. Without a word, he let Gilgamesh step aboard. Together they crossed the dark waters, where no wind blew and no star moved. The waves whispered secrets of all who had ever lived. Names long forgotten drifted past, like faint music. Gilgamesh felt each one brush against his soul, brief, tender, unbearable. Tell me, listener, if you could live forever, would you still remember love? Or would eternity wash it away, leaving only the echo? When they reached the far shore, an island shimmered in endless twilight. Upon it stood a man older than the mountains, Utnapishtim, survivor of the great flood. His eyes were pale as moonlight, his hands wrinkled like river stones. "So," the old one said, "you are the king who defied death." Gilgamesh fell to his knees. "Tell me how you conquered it." Utnapishtim smiled sadly. I did not conquer it. I endured it. And in that moment, Gilgamesh understood nothing and everything. Utnapishtim looked at Gilgamesh for a long while. The waves behind him shimmered faintly, and the wind whispered the names of ages long gone. "You seek the secret of immortality," he said at last. "But before I tell you what I know, you must hear how I came to hold it. For the story of my eternity is also the story of the gods' regret." He turned toward the horizon, where sea and sky became one. His voice deepened, slow as the tide. In the days before the flood, the world was younger. Men spoke too loudly, multiplied too quickly, and the gods grew weary of their noise. So they gathered in council, and Enlil, lord of the storm, declared that silence would return to the earth. The flood would come. Gilgamesh's breath caught. The sea seemed to darken with every word. But one god, Utnapishtim continued, pitted us. Ea, lord of wisdom, came to me in a dream. He whispered through the walls of my reed hut, "Man of Shurapek, son of Ubertutu, tear down your house and build a ship. Abandon wealth. Seek life. Take aboard the seed of every living thing, for the waters will rise, and the world will drown." He paused. The waves sighed against the shore, as though remembering. I built the vessel as he said, vast as a city, sealed with pitch and prayer. My family came aboard, and so did the beasts of field and sky. Then came the storm. It began with a sigh, but soon the earth split open, and the heavens fell. The wind screamed for 6 days and 7 nights. On the 7th, all was still. The sea had swallowed the mountains. Gilgamesh said nothing. Only the sound of the tide answered, endless and slow. When the sun returned, said Utnapishtim, I wept. The ship rested upon a peak. I sent a dove. It found no resting place. Then a swallow. It too returned. But when I sent a raven, it did not come back. Then I knew the earth was free again. He closed his eyes. The gods came down. They wept for what they had done. Enlil, seeing me alive, was furious. But Ea spoke. He has suffered for all mankind. Give him peace, if not death. And so the gods granted me and my wife a gift no mortal was meant to bear, life without end. He looked at Gilgamesh then, his eyes pale and ancient. You asked for this gift. But immortality, my son, is not a crown. It is a burden that never falls. Tell me, listener, would you still crave eternal life if you knew it came with endless solitude? Gilgamesh bowed his head. Still, he said, let me try. Let me prove that man can grasp what the gods withhold. Utnapishtim sighed. Very well. I will give you a test. Stay awake for 6 days and 7 nights. If you can master sleep, the twin of death, then perhaps the gods will see you worthy. The king agreed. He sat upon the sand, eyes open, heart defiant, but the sea murmured lullabies older than time, and the wind stroked his hair like a mother's hand. His eyes grew heavy. His breath slowed. Before the first night ended, he slept. When he awoke, 7 loaves of bread lay beside him, 1 for each day he had slept. Mold covered the first. The last was still warm. Utnapishtim smiled gently. You see, even kings cannot conquer the simplest death. Gilgamesh wept, not for the test, but for the truth. But Utnapishtim's wife, moved by pity, whispered to her husband, He came so far. Give him something to take home. So the old man spoke again. There's one thing still hidden. In the deepest part of the sea grows a plant with thorns like a rose and roots that taste of eternity. Retrieve it, and your youth will return. Hope flared within Gilgamesh, like dawn breaking through storm. He bound stones to his feet and plunged into the black water. The sea embraced him coldly, dragging him down through silence and shadow. He found the plant at last, a pale bloom glowing in the depths. Its scent was like memory itself, sweet, aching, infinite. He tore it from the silt and rose gasping to the surface. I will bring it to Uruk, he cried. I will share it with all my people. None shall ever grow old again. The gods watched from the clouds, saying nothing. Tell me, listener, if you held eternity in your hands, would you keep it? Or would you share it with the world? Gilgamesh held it close as he journeyed home. The waves calm behind him, the sun warm upon his face. For the first time since Enkidu's death, he smiled. But destiny was waiting, patient as the sea itself. The sea was calm when Gilgamesh began his journey home. The wind carried no omens, only the soft scent of salt and dawn. In his hand, wrapped in linen and reverence, lay the flower of immortality, its petals pale as moonlight, its fragrance like memory made flesh. He smiled as he walked along the shore, his feet sinking softly into the sand. The sun warmed his back, and for the first time in many years, his heart felt light. He whispered to himself, "I will bring it to Uruk. I will share it with my people. None shall ever taste decay again." The waves rolled gently beside him, like applause from an unseen audience. He crossed deserts and valleys, and at each night's rest, he would unwrap the flower and gaze upon it. It glowed faintly in the dark, breathing softly as though alive. Its scent filled the air, and Gilgamesh would whisper, "You will end sorrow. You will undo death." But the gods were listening, and destiny does not yield its throne so easily. One evening, weary from travel, he reached a small pool surrounded by reeds. The air shimmered with heat. Even the insects had gone silent. Gilgamesh knelt to bathe, setting the flower carefully beside him. The water was cool, and it lulled his exhaustion. For a brief, fatal moment, he closed his eyes. From the reeds, a serpent emerged, its scales glinting like polished bronze, its eyes black as the void between stars. Drawn by the scent of eternity, it slithered silently toward the glowing flower. When Gilgamesh opened his eyes, it was too late. The serpent coiled around the bloom, swallowed it whole, and vanished into the reeds. He leapt to his feet, roaring, the sound echoing through the valley. He searched the water, the grass, the sky itself, but the creature was gone. The only trace left was the faint shimmer of old skin upon the ground. He fell to his knees. The world seemed to tilt and darken. He whispered, "It is over. The gods have taken even this from me." Tell me, listener, have you ever held something so precious, only to lose it the moment you believed it safe? The sun dipped low, and its last light touched the horizon like a dying ember. Gilgamesh stared at his reflection in the water. The lines on his face seemed deeper, the gold in his eyes dimmer. He looked not like a god, but like a man, tired, mortal, small beneath the sky. He lay upon the ground until the stars appeared. For a long while, he did not move. The reeds whispered softly, like distant voices. Somewhere in the dark, a snake shed its skin and slipped away renewed. And in that quiet, Gilgamesh began to laugh, not with joy, but with understanding. "Immortality belongs to the serpent," he said, "for it sheds its skin and becomes new again. But man must learn to live within one skin, one breath, one fleeting heart." He rose at dawn and began walking back toward Uruk. Each step was slower, but lighter. Along the way, he passed the mountains he had crossed, the rivers he had waded, and the trees that had watched him pass before. The world was unchanged, yet everything looked different. He no longer sought to conquer it. He listened to it. When at last he saw the white walls of his city rising from the plain, gleaming under the morning sun, his eyes filled with tears. The same walls he had built in his youth, once symbols of pride, now appeared as what they truly were, testament to human hands, fragile yet enduring. The guards at the gate bowed low. "My king," they said, "you have returned." He nodded. "Yes," he whispered, "and I have found what I sought, though not as I expected." He climbed to the highest terrace of the temple and looked down at the people below. Bakers shaping dough, children chasing shadows, women singing by the river. Each face was bright, alive, impermanent. He smiled. "This is immortality," he murmured. "Not in the flesh, but in the echo of what we build, in the memory that lingers when we are gone." Tell me, listener, what do you think lasts longer, a life, or the love it leaves behind? The sun rose fully, gilding the city in gold. Gilgamesh raised his hands to the light. I could not bring them eternity, he said softly, but I will teach them how to live as if life itself were eternal. That day, he ordered the scribes to record all his journeys, the battles, the dreams, the questions, and the loss. He said, "Write them upon clay. Let future ages remember that we were here, that we sought the gods and found ourselves instead." And so they did. The tablets were baked in fire and sealed in the walls of Uruk. 1,000 years later, and 1,000 more after that, the dust would cover them, but not erase them. For words, unlike flesh, do not die, they wait. And somewhere, beneath the sands of forgotten empires, a single line remains unbroken. He who saw the deep, who knew all things, returned at last to teach men how to live. When Gilgamesh returned to Uruk, the white walls rose before him like memory carved into stone. The city gleamed beneath the morning sun, unchanged, and yet, to his eyes, everything had transformed. He had crossed mountains that bled, seas that whispered, and darkness that swallowed stars. He had held eternity in his hands and watched it slip away like sand between his fingers. Now, as he walked through the gates, the laughter of children, the cries of merchants, the sound of hammers upon bronze, these seemed holier than any temple. The people gathered in silence as he passed. They had heard stories of their king's journey, the forest guardian slain, the flood survivor found, the serpent that stole eternal life. Yet the man who returned was not the same as the one who had left. His eyes were softer, his voice quieter, his crown heavier with meaning. He paused at the steps of the great ziggurat, its bricks still gleaming white under the sun. He touched the stone and whispered, "You have outlasted my arrogance. Tell me, listener, have you ever returned to a place that remained unchanged, only to realize that you were the one who had become someone else?" Inside the temple, the priests bowed low. They asked what wisdom he had brought back from the edge of the world. Gilgamesh looked toward the altar, where incense drifted like ghosts of prayer. "I went seeking immortality," he said, "but found only the shadow of it. The gods keep eternity for themselves, but they gave us something greater, the power to remember." That evening, he climbed to the top of the walls of Uruk. Below him, the city stretched wide, breathing like a living creature. He heard the songs of laborers, the crackle of fires, the heartbeat of his people, and for the first time, he understood that greatness was not in the conquest of the world, but in the quiet shaping of it. He called for his scribes. "Bring tablets," he said. "Let these walls speak long after I am gone." The scribes gathered by torchlight, their styluses scratching gently against clay. Gilgamesh told them everything, of Enkidu, of the forest and the flood, of the serpent and the dream. He spoke until dawn, until his words became breathless whispers. When they finished, the youngest scribe looked up and asked, "My king, what shall we call this story?" Gilgamesh smiled faintly. "Call it what it is, the tale of a man who sought to defeat death and instead learned to live." For many years after, he ruled with quiet wisdom. No longer did he demand temples to his name. Instead, he built schools for scribes, wells for the poor, and gardens where old men could rest in the shade. He walked among his people, unguarded, unadorned. When they asked him how to live well, he answered simply, "Build something that outlives your breath." Sometimes, he would visit the river at dusk, the place where he and Enkidu had first met. He would sit upon the bank, listening to the wind ripple through the reeds. "Brother," he would whisper, "I could not bring you back, but you never truly left, did you?" The years passed. His hair grew white, his step slower, yet even in age, his presence filled the air like quiet thunder. The children of Uruk would see him walking through the markets, and their parents would whisper, "There goes the king who spoke to the gods." One night, an eclipse darkened the sky. Gilgamesh climbed once more to the top of the ziggurat. The moon was a red coin sinking into shadow. He looked upon his city and smiled. "I have built walls," he said softly, "but more than that, I have built memory. Tell me, listener, What kind of wall are you building with your days? One of pride or of love? The wind rose gently, tugging at his robe. Somewhere below, the river hummed its endless song. He closed his eyes. "I am tired," he whispered, "but I am no longer afraid." The next morning, the people found him seated at the summit, hands folded, eyes open toward the dawn. He looked as if he were still listening, to the city, to the earth, to the gods who had once denied him. They buried him beneath the river, where water and memory meet. The flood washed over his tomb, but the story endured, and though the walls of Uruk would one day crumble, the tablets he left behind did not. They would travel through centuries, through tongues, through dust, until one day, someone like you would hear his name and wonder what it meant to live forever. Perhaps that is what immortality truly is. Not the body that endures, but the story that keeps being told. They say that when a great king dies, the earth itself pauses to remember him. And so it was with Gilgamesh. The morning he did not rise. The birds fell silent upon the walls of Uruk. The river stilled its voice. Even the sun seemed slow to climb the sky. His body lay in the great hall, surrounded by the fragrance of cedar and incense. The people came in quiet processions, priests, farmers, children, all walking barefoot through the corridors of stone. No one spoke. They simply laid their hands upon the marble floor and bowed their heads. For 40 days and 40 nights, Uruk mourned. They wept not for a king who had ruled them, but for the man who had taught them what it meant to be human. When the high priest entered to anoint him for burial, he said softly, "The gods once denied him immortality, yet his name shall live longer than theirs." Tell me, listener, if your name could outlast your breath, what would you want it to mean? At dusk, they carried him toward the river. The air shimmered with torches, and the water reflected their flames like trembling stars. The priests sang hymns in the ancient tongue, their voices deep as the wind that moves through the mountains. The Queen Mother, old and frail, whispered, "He was born to build walls, but he learned to build souls." They placed his body in a chamber beneath the riverbank, sealed with baked brick and bitumen. Within it, they set not gold or jewels, but the clay tablets of his story, the tale of his search, his sorrow, and his truth. When they finished, the eldest scribe pressed his palm into the wet clay of the final tablet and said, "Let these words endure when stone forgets." And then they sealed the tomb. That night, Uruk slept, but not in grief. The city dreamed. They dreamed of the young king, who once roared against the heavens, and of the older one, who whispered to the wind. They dreamed of Enkidu's laughter, of forests that hummed with life, of serpents shedding their skin beneath silver moons. The dreams flowed like rivers through the people's hearts, carrying pieces of him into every soul. Far away, in realms beyond the horizon, the gods watched in silence. Enlil, Lord of Storms, spoke first. He was a mortal who dared to challenge us. But Inanna smiled, and in doing so, he became like us. Ea, God of Wisdom, nodded. He asked for immortality and received a greater gift, the knowledge that life's brevity is what gives it worth. The wind stirred, and somewhere beyond the veil, a new sound echoed, the laughter of two friends reunited. Gilgamesh found himself standing once more beside the river of his youth. The reeds swayed gently. The air smelled of rain and warm soil. "Brother," came a familiar voice. Enkidu stepped from the shadows, smiling as he had long ago. "You took your time." Gilgamesh laughed softly, the sound like distant thunder. "I had walls to finish." They walked together through the fields of dusk, their feet leaving no prints. The sun never set there, nor did it rise. It simply glowed, eternal twilight, neither beginning nor end. "Do you remember," Enkidu said, "when we thought the gods were cruel?" "Yes," said Gilgamesh, "but now I see. They only gave us what we could bear." They reached a hill overlooking an endless plain. Below them shimmered countless cities, some ancient, some yet unborn. Gilgamesh looked down, eyes filled with quiet wonder. "Are these?" "Yes," said Enkidu. "The children of your story. Every city that rises from clay owes something to Uruk." Gilgamesh's gaze softened. "Then perhaps we never die. We just continue." The wind passed through the grass, carrying their laughter across eternity. "Tell me, listener, do you think stories can dream of those who tell them?" When dawn returned to the mortal world, the river flowed calmly over the buried king. Fishermen cast their nets and children played along the banks, unaware that beneath their feet lay the one who had once spoken to the gods. But sometimes, when the night is quiet and the moon touches the water, the reeds still sway as if stirred by unseen hands. Some say it is only the wind. Others say it is the echo of Gilgamesh, whispering to the river that carried his soul home. And if you listen long enough, you might hear it too. The voice that spoke across millennia, soft as breath, certain as the tide. We are mortal, but our stories are not. The walls of Uruk still stand in dreams, and the king still walks beside them, not seeking eternity, but remembering how it feels to live. Long after Gilgamesh slept beneath the river, the heavens grew restless, high above the clouds. In the halls where light has no source and time moves like breath, the gods gathered to speak of what had passed. The great tablets of fate lay open before them, their lines glowing faintly in the dark. Enlil, Lord of Storms, broke the silence first. "He defied us," he said, his voice rolling like thunder. "He sought what was forbidden. He made himself equal to the divine." Inanna, goddess of love and war, tilted her head. "And yet he did not rise against us in anger," she said softly. "He only wished to understand why we made him as we did, half light, half clay." Yea, God of wisdom, touched the tablet with one long finger, and through that wish, he became what none of us foresaw. Not a god, not merely man, but a bridge. The halls shimmered with murmurs. A lesser deity asked, "A bridge? Between what?" "Between meaning and mortality," Ye replied. "He showed his kind that to die is not to vanish, and to live forever is not to be alive." Tell me, listener, have you ever wondered which is greater, to live briefly and burn bright, or to exist eternally without flame? Then spoke Shamash, the sun himself, who had watched Gilgamesh through every trial. He was arrogant once, yes, but when the serpent stole his flower, he did not curse us. He understood. He returned home, and in doing so, he taught men to build, to remember, to love. Inanna smiled faintly. Perhaps the gods do not create wisdom. Perhaps we borrow it from those who suffer enough to seek it. The words hung heavy in the air. Even Enlil was silent. Below, the earth turned slowly. The river flowed over the king's tomb. Generations were born, lived, and died. Cities rose and fell. Yet the walls of Uruk, those white stones kissed by the sun, remained, defiant against oblivion. Every so often, a new scribe would unearth an old tablet and brush away the dust. He would read aloud the words carved by hands that no longer existed. He who saw the deep, who knew all things. And for a moment, the gods would feel something they could not name. Was it pride, regret, or perhaps longing? The same longing that once drove a mortal king to climb their gates and ask why. His story spreads, said he quietly, across the sands, across tongues. Even when names change, the echo remains. Men will tell it long after our temples crumble. Enlil frowned. Do you mean to say his story outlives us? Ye's eyes gleamed like water at dawn. Everything ends, even gods. But the stories of men, those stubborn sparks, carry pieces of us forward. In remembering them, the world remembers us. Tell me, listener, when you remember someone long gone, do you think they hear you? The council fell silent. Then Inanna rose, her robes trailing starlight. I will honor him, she said, for in Gilgamesh, I see the reflection of what we once were, curious, defiant, alive. And so she descended to the mortal world, where the river met the sea. She placed a single lotus upon the water. It glowed faintly, neither living nor dying, floating between worlds. The wind carried her whisper across the plains. Remember what he learned, that every breath is sacred because it will one day end. Far away, a shepherd watching his flock saw the lotus drift past. He did not know its name, but he felt peace as he watched it glow. He whispered to his son, "Once there was a king who sought to live forever, and though he failed, the gods still speak his name." And somewhere, perhaps within the deep where silences wait, Gilgamesh stirred and smiled. The gods returned to their thrones, and the stars resumed their patient burning. Yet something had changed. Their gaze upon the world grew softer, as if they too had learned humility from the dust they had shaped. From that day onward, when men prayed, not from fear, but from longing, the gods listened more closely, and when they wept, the rain fell not as punishment, but as remembrance. For even the immortal can envy the beauty of a single mortal heartbeat. Tell me, listener, if eternity itself could dream, would it dream of being alive, just for a moment? The wind answers still. It whispers through the ruins of Uruk, through temples long abandoned, through pages yet unwritten. The gods remember, because we remember them. And thus the story of Gilgamesh lived on, not in temples or stone, but in the quiet pulse of every human soul that refuses to forget. 1,000 years passed, then another 1,000. The river changed its course. The temples sank beneath the sand. The name Uruk became a whisper, then an echo, then a breath lost to time. But memory, like the seeds of desert flowers, sleeps only until rain returns. The world had changed. The old gods had fallen silent, replaced by new tongues, new faiths, new empires. Yet beneath the shifting soil of Mesopotamia, the story waited, patient as stone, eternal as longing. One day, a man with dust in his hair and wonder in his eyes stood where the river once sang. He was no king, no priest, only a seeker, guided by curiosity and a strange pull he could not name. His hands brushed away layers of sand, and there, glimmering faintly beneath the earth, he found the edge of a wall, white, worn, ancient. He called for others. Together they dug, and the sand fell away like centuries exhaling. Stairways appeared, courtyards, broken tablets, and at last words. The first line he could read was carved in wedge-shaped marks, faded but defiant. He who saw the deep, who knew all things. The man froze. He did not understand the language, but he felt it, the weight of ages pressing gently against his chest. Tell me, listener, have you ever touched something so old that it felt alive beneath your fingers? As the sun sank, the dig site glowed gold and red. The wind carried whispers through the ruins, a sound not quite human, not quite divine. The seekers did not notice, but somewhere, beyond their hearing, the walls of Uruk seemed to sigh. The next day, they uncovered more tablets, hundreds of them, some cracked, some whole, all marked with the strange rhythm of a forgotten script. When they read them, the story came alive again. The king, the wild man, the forest, the flood, the serpent, the river. It was as if the earth itself had spoken. The scholars gathered, arguing over every line. Was it myth? Was it history? But at night, when the torches burned low and the desert stars looked down, a silence would settle that none could explain. In that silence, something stirred, an awareness, faint but certain. Gilgamesh was awake again, not in flesh, not in voice, but in remembrance. Every word spoken, every symbol read aloud, became a breath that returned him to existence. And so, in a way, the first king walked again among men, through their thoughts, their curiosity, their hunger for meaning. The story traveled across lands and languages. It was copied, translated, studied, retold. Some heard it as a legend, others as philosophy, others still as a mirror held up to the soul of mankind. One poet wrote, "He sought eternity and found the measure of the human heart." Another whispered, "Perhaps we are all still walking toward Uruk." Tell me, listener, do you believe that stories ever die? Or do they merely sleep, waiting for us to dream them awake? Centuries turned like pages. The tablets found homes in museums, behind glass and soft light. Visitors passed by, their reflections mingling with the ancient words. Some lingered, some wept without knowing why. A child once asked his teacher, "Did he really live?" And the teacher smiled. "If we still speak his name, does it matter?" Outside, the city lights of the modern world shimmered where Uruk once stood. Cars roared where chariots had rolled. Screens glowed where clay had once been carved. But beneath the concrete and metal, the bones of the old city still dreamed. Sometimes, after rain, the scent of wet earth rises and mingles with something older, a faint sweetness, like cedar and salt. Those who breathe deeply swear they hear a hum in the air, low and patient, as if the ground itself remembers the sound of hammers building white walls long ago. And perhaps it does. Perhaps the earth, too, is a storyteller, retelling the same tale again and again through stone, seed, and silence. Tell me, listener, what stories lie buried beneath your own heart, waiting for someone to uncover them? When night falls over the ruins, the desert wind passes through the broken archways and stirs the dust into spirals. For a brief moment, under moonlight, the shapes of towers and walls seem to rise again, ghosts of the city reborn through memory. Then they fade, as all things do. But the echo remains, and if you listen closely, beyond the hum of your own breath, you might still hear it. The ancient voice of a king speaking softly from the clay. "I built walls, I sought eternity, I found meaning, and now, through you, I live once more." They're the river that no map can name. It flows not through valleys or mountains, but through the corridors of memory. Its waters are made of moments, every breath ever taken, every story ever told. This, the ancients whispered, is the river beneath time. If you close your eyes, you might hear it. It sounds like the hush between heartbeats, the slow murmur of dreams turning into dust. It is said that when Gilgamesh lay down his crown and closed his eyes, his soul sank into this river, not to vanish, but to drift, carrying his story through ages yet unborn. For thousands of years, that river wound its silent way beneath deserts and cities, beneath temples and tombs. When the scribes pressed their styluses into wet clay, their words became ripples on its surface. When the storytellers of Babylon spoke of gods and floods, they added new currents to its flow. And when you, listener, lean close tonight to hear these words, your breath, too, touches that same eternal stream. Tell me, have you ever wondered where stories go when no one speaks them anymore? They sink here, into the river beneath time, and there they wait. Sometimes, when a new voice dares to tell an old tale, the current stirs. Fragments of forgotten lives rise like bubbles to the surface. A song half remembered, a prayer whispered in dust, a face glimpsed through water. In that way, memory is never lost. It only sleeps. The old gods, too, have drifted along this current. They have become whispers, symbols, constellations. Once they ruled with thunder. Now, they live quietly in our metaphors. Enlil became the wind that shakes the windows at night. Inanna became the fire behind every human desire. Ea, the wise one, still murmurs through the sound of flowing water. The river carries them all, just as it carries us. One day, a child will stand by the banks of a modern river, perhaps the Tigris, perhaps another, and toss a stone into the water. The ripples will spread outward, touching everything. He will not know that beneath that current, another, older stream moves unseen. A memory of Uruk, of the flood, of the first story ever written. And perhaps, somewhere deep within, the spirit of Gilgamesh will turn and smile. For the river that took his story away has also carried it home again. Tell me, listener, if you could cast one memory into the river to last forever, which would you choose? The river remembers kindness first. It remembers hands that built and words that forgave. It forgets anger faster than we do, yet never loses sorrow. It polishes it smooth, until grief itself becomes a kind of beauty. There are places, still, where the earth hums faintly at night, where you can feel that current beneath your feet. Old cities built atop older ones. Museums filled with fragments of clay that once sang in sunlight. Archives lined with tablets and scrolls whose authors have long become dust. Each mark, each line, is a drop from that ancient river. And every time someone reads, remembers, or even dreams of them, the waters shimmer again. You see, time is not a straight road. It is a circle, or perhaps a spiral, turning endlessly through the heart of the world. And in its center flows the river, the keeper of everything we have ever been. Perhaps that is what immortality truly means. Not to live without end, but to be remembered through the soft persistence of meaning. The river beneath time holds all of it. Your voice, mine, Gilgamesh's, the laughter of Enkidu, the songs of cities that no longer stand. Even silence has a sound there, a low note that binds every life into one eternal chord. And someday, when you are gone, when all the lights of your world have faded, your story will drift into that current too. It will join the millions before it, glowing faintly in the dark. And someone, centuries from now, will find it and feel the same quiet wonder you feel tonight. Tell me, can you hear it now? The murmur beneath everything, the ancient heartbeat beneath your own. That is the river beneath time. And it whispers, even now. All things pass. Nothing is lost. The voice fades, but the echo remains, flowing on, through memory, through dream, through you. The flood was never just water. It was memory, washing away the arrogance of those who thought themselves eternal. The Sumerians called it a punishment. The later poets called it cleansing. But perhaps it was neither. Perhaps it was simply the earth remembering balance. And now, thousands of years later, that memory rises again, not through the Euphrates or the Tigris, but through melting ice, swelling seas, and skies heavy with forgotten rain. You can hear it if you listen closely. The old river stirring in the veins of the world. The flood preparing to return, not as myth, but as consequence. Tell me, listener, when was the last time you felt the earth breathing beneath your feet? Can you feel that breath growing shallower? The flood has changed its form. It no longer comes with roaring waters alone. It comes in silence, in forests turned to ash, in rivers that no longer reach the sea, in cities glowing faintly under electric suns, while the stars vanish one by one. The ancients once built walls to hold back chaos. We build towers now of steel, of data, of pride, believing ourselves safe above the tide. But all walls crumble. All stories repeat. Somewhere, the ghost of Gilgamesh walks again. He does not wear a crown now, but a suit, a badge, or a screen. He still seeks immortality, not through the gods, but through algorithms, archives, and digital dreams. And still, the serpent waits. When the floods came to Uruk, they washed away the arrogance of empire. When they come again, and they will wash away something quieter, the illusion of control. Tell me, listener, what would you save if the waters rose tomorrow? Your name, your memories, your story. The river beneath time does not judge, but it remembers. Every act of creation, every act of destruction, adds to its current, and now it runs faster than ever, carrying billions of voices, billions of dreams, all whispering the same question. How long can we build before we learn to belong? There are those who believe the flood has already begun, not in waves, but in noise. An endless tide of information that drowns meaning, a digital deluge that washes away silence itself. We scroll, we shout, we fill the air with words that weigh nothing, and yet they pile up like water behind a fragile dam. Even now, somewhere in the archives of the future, your voice is being recorded, your thoughts preserved in invisible clay. The scribes of our age do not carve with styluses, but with code, and the tablets they write on are made not of earth, but of light. Still, the purpose is the same, to remember, to defy oblivion. But the flood is patient. It knows that what we build too high will one day sink. That is its mercy and its message, that no civilization, no empire, No human design can exist without humility. The old gods understood this. That is why they gave men floods instead of eternities. For only through loss do we remember what is sacred. Somewhere, perhaps right now, the wind over the Persian Gulf whispers to the ghosts of cities buried beneath the waves. It tells them, they are doing it again. And the ghosts answer, yes, they always do. Tell me, listener, if the flood came not to destroy but to cleanse, would you resist it or let it take what it must? The rain begins to fall again, not as punishment, but as prophecy. Each drop a word, each storm a warning, each thunderclap a memory calling us back to humility. Perhaps that is why the story of Gilgamesh still lives. Not to remind us of gods or kings, but to remind us of balance. The delicate thread between creation and ruin, between power and peace. The flood will return, in one form or another, not because the gods are cruel, but because the world remembers when we forget. And when that water rises, whether through the ocean, or through silence, or through truth, it will wash away everything false, leaving only what was always real, the story, the memory, the current that binds us all. So when the rain comes, do not fear it. Step into it. Let it remind you of who you were, and of the world that once was. Because in the end, the flood is not the end. It is the beginning again. When the waters withdrew, the world was silent. No birds, no voices, only wind over empty plains. The flood had erased the lines of cities, leaving nothing but smooth earth and scattered stones. Yet beneath that silence, something stirred. From the silt and the ash, hands began to rise. Human hands, trembling, raw, stubborn. The survivors built fires, not to conquer the dark, but to remember that light had once existed. They gathered stones and shaped them into circles. Not walls, not temples, just shapes. The first outlines of belonging. They were not kings or priests or scribes. They were simply the builders of dust. And though they had forgotten the names of their gods, somewhere in their blood, the rhythm of creation still pulsed. Tell me, listener, have you ever built something knowing it would one day fall? The builders did not yet have words for history. They did not speak of Gilgamesh, nor of Uruk, nor of the gods who once ruled the winds. But in their dreams, they saw fragments. A shining city, a river that whispered, a man who walked beside the sun. Sometimes, one of them would wake before dawn and stare toward the horizon, feeling an ache for something they could not name. And the wind would answer softly, carrying the echo of a language older than memory. They learned to plant again, to carve wood, to shape clay. They sang to the earth as they worked, not knowing that their songs were ancient prayers, handed down not through words, but through instinct. The earth, patient as always, began to yield. Sprouts pushed through the mud. Goats returned to graze. The river, though changed, found its new path. And so, humanity began again, quietly, humbly. They built homes where the soil was soft and the wind kind. They built without arrogance, as if afraid to awaken the flood once more. Their temples were small, their gods gentle. No more thunder, no more towers, only gratitude. And yet, the cycle had already begun again. Children born among the ruins grew curious. They asked questions their elders could not answer. Who built these broken stones? Who carved the shapes beneath the sand? The old ones shook their heads. Before us, they said, there were others. But they could not say who. So the children dreamed. They imagined kings of gold, heroes who spoke to stars, gods who walked among men. And in their imagining, the world began to remember itself. Tell me, listener, do you think the past ever truly dies? Or does it live on through the dreams of the living? The builders of dust passed away, one by one, their fires fading into the earth. But their children built larger homes, stronger walls. Their children wrote symbols again, lines, marks, meaning. They called them words, but the earth called them remembrance. And in time, they rediscovered metal, and numbers, and pride. They raised cities once more. They prayed to new gods with old names. They told stories of a man who defied the heavens and sought eternity. They did not know his name, but they remembered his longing. And so, through them, the spirit of Sumer walked again, not as memory this time, but as pattern, woven into the design of human ambition. Civilizations rose. They built towers to the clouds. They dug into the earth for wealth that glowed like stars. They mastered fire and steel and silence. They reached beyond the sky, searching again for immortality. And the river beneath time watched, patient as ever. It whispered to itself. They build again. They forget again. Tell me, listener, if you could speak to them, to these new builders of dust, what would you tell them? To stop, or to remember? The flood had not destroyed humanity. It had only reminded it what it meant to begin. For only through loss do we understand the value of creation, and only through impermanence do we touch eternity. In the end, all empires crumble into dust, but the builders never stop, because deep within them, within you, burns the same divine spark that first rose from the mud beside the rivers of Sumer. And maybe that is the secret the gods could never erase, that even in ruin, we create. Even in forgetting, we remember. Even in dust, we build. The world had changed again. The towers of glass and steel had crumbled. The lights of cities faded, one by one, until the earth was once more ruled by silence. Only ruins remained, bones of civilizations layered upon bones. And in that silence walked a single figure, moving through dust and wind. No one knew his name. He had outlived language, perhaps even time itself. He carried a satchel made of woven bark, and inside it were things the world had forgotten. Small clay fragments, etched with marks that no living tongue could read. They were the last tablets. Tell me, listener, if you were the last to remember, would you still speak, knowing no one could hear? The man walked where oceans had retreated, over plains that had once been sea. He found the remnants of cities, machines rusted into bone, towers hollowed by wind. He did not mourn them. He simply gathered what remained. A shard of bronze, a glass bead, a fragment of a tablet bearing the name Uruk. At night, he lit fires in the ruins and read to the silence. He did not know the meaning of the words, but the rhythm felt familiar, like the heartbeat of a sleeping god. Sometimes, as he read, he thought he heard whispers rising from the dust, a king's laughter, a goddess's sigh, the murmur of a river remembering its name. He began to speak to them, as though they were listening. Once, he said, you dreamed of immortality. You built, you conquered, you fell. Now, I am what remains of your dream. And in the still air, it seemed as though the earth itself answered. Wind moved through the ruins, carrying a faint echo. Remember us, for we once remembered you. Tell me, listener, do you ever feel that the past listens when you speak of it? The man, if man he still was, walked until his feet bled and the horizon curved away into haze. He reached a valley where black stone jutted from the ground like broken teeth. There, he found a chamber carved deep beneath the earth. Inside, he saw rows upon rows of tablets, tens of thousands of them, stacked like the ribs of a buried beast. Each one was covered in the wedge-shaped marks of a forgotten hand. He fell to his knees. The light from his torch flickered, casting shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. He whispered, so many voices. He began to clean the tablets, one by one, brushing centuries of dust away. He did not understand the words, but he felt them. The clay hummed softly, like the faint resonance of something eternal. For weeks, maybe months, he stayed there, reading aloud to the darkness. And the more he read, the more he felt the air itself listening. The chamber grew warmer. Sometimes the walls trembled slightly, as though remembering what it once was to be alive. At last, when his voice grew thin and his body weary, he lay among the tablets and whispered, I am the last, but I am not alone. You live through me. The torch guttered out. Darkness returned, but in that darkness, something stirred. The marks upon the clay began to glow faintly, one by one. like stars reigniting in a forgotten sky. The words ancient, divine, human rose like embers, forming constellations upon the walls. They were no longer symbols. They were voices. Thousands, millions of voices, whispering across time. We are the builders. We are the dreamers. We are the dust that remembers. The man smiled as light washed over him. He felt the warmth of every story, every prayer, every name ever spoken. He became part of the song. Outside, the world turned quietly. Rain fell again for the first time in centuries. The rivers swelled, and somewhere deep below, the tablets pulsed like the heartbeat of the world returning to itself. Tell me, listener, if you could preserve one word for eternity, what would it be? When morning came, there was no trace of the man, only a new inscription carved into the stone by a hand unseen. The keeper has joined the kept. The story watches itself now. The wind moved through the chamber, carrying dust across the glowing tablets. They dimmed, but did not fade, because stories, once spoken, never truly sleep. And so the cycle continued. The flood, the fire, the silence, the rebuilding, always beginning again, always carried by those who remember. Above ground, where the sun rose over an empty horizon, a single blade of grass pushed through the ash. It shimmered in the light, green and gold, the first sign of life in a dead world. Perhaps the gods were watching, or perhaps, like the tablets, they too had become memory, a current of thought flowing forever beneath the surface of time. Either way, the story endured, and as long as someone listens, even now, even you, the keeper's voice continues to echo through the dust. Do not forget what it means to begin again. Before the world, there was silence, and after every ending, there is silence still. But between those silences, something always stirs. A spark, a word, a breath. The beginning again. Long after the keeper's light faded, the world slept. Storms softened. The earth healed. The rivers carved new paths through forgotten plains. Centuries passed, uncounted. And then, one morning, the sun rose over the horizon. Not for the first time, but not quite the same as before. It was softer, gentler, as though the light itself remembered what had come before and chose mercy instead of fire. In the new warmth, the land shimmered. Grass spread where ash had been. Birds returned to skies that had been empty for ages. And along a narrow river, a small band of wanderers stopped to drink. They were thin, silent, uncertain. But when the youngest of them looked into the water, he saw something strange, a reflection that was not quite his own. Behind his face shimmered faint lines, wedge-shaped, ancient, moving like ripples of thought. He blinked, and the vision was gone, but the feeling remained. Tell me, listener, have you ever felt as though the world was remembering itself through you? The wanderers built a camp by the river. They stacked stones, gathered wood, and for the first time in generations, they sang. Their words had no meaning, yet their melody felt old, a song that had waited 1,000 lifetimes to be sung again. When night fell, they sat around the fire. The oldest among them told a story. He spoke of a king carved from both clay and starlight, a man who walked beyond death, searching for eternity. He did not know the name Gilgamesh, yet the story flowed from his lips as if whispered by the wind itself. The others listened in awe, and when he finished, the youngest asked, did he find what he was looking for? The old man smiled faintly. He found what all of us will, he said, the place where stories never end. Somewhere, far below them, beneath layers of soil and stone, the tablets still glowed faintly. They pulsed once, like a heartbeat, and then rested again. The earth had remembered. Tell me, listener, what if you are part of that same remembering? What if every dream, every song, every breath you take is another line added to the story of the world? As dawn approached, mist rose from the river. In that mist, faint figures appeared. Not ghosts, but echoes, builders, scribes, kings, and gods. They looked upon the new people and smiled, for the cycle had turned, and humanity had begun again. One of the wanderers, a woman with hair like river clay, walked to the water's edge. She dipped her hands into the current and whispered, "Let this world be gentle." The river replied, not in words, but in sound. A low hum, deep and familiar, like the resonance of all time. It was the voice of the river beneath time, the same current that had carried Sumer's dreams, Babylon's glory, and all the forgotten empires of men. It whispered, "You have built, you have fallen, you will build again. But this time, remember." The woman turned to the others. She spoke softly. "We must write. We must keep the words." And though none of them yet knew how, something in her tone carried the weight of prophecy. They began to scratch symbols on wet clay. Simple marks at first, lines, circles, waves. But in those shapes, the language of the world began again. The fire burned low. The stars dimmed. The horizon glowed gold. And for the first time, since the end of the old world, humanity had a dawn not born of fear, but of memory. Tell me, listener, do you feel it too? That quiet pulse beneath the surface of things, reminding you that even endings are beginnings in disguise. Somewhere, perhaps beyond the stars, the old gods watched and smiled. They had long since become one with the stories themselves. And through the hearts of these new dreamers, they lived again, not as rulers, but as whispers of wisdom carried by wind and song. The light of dawn grew brighter, touching every hill, every seed, every sleeping tablet beneath the ground. And as it spread, it revealed something wondrous. Across the plains, tiny specks of gold shimmered in the soil, dust from the ruins of Uruk, scattered by centuries, now reborn as the glittering breath of a new world. The woman raised her eyes to the light and smiled. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "This is the first dawn again." And so it was. The story had come full circle. The world had begun once more. And as the wind carried the sound of her words into eternity, they joined the river, flowing forever through time, through memory, through us.